My name is Amelia. I'm 35 years old, and for the last 5 years, I've been the sole financial pillar holding my family up, a fact they've never once bothered to acknowledge. Just last weekend, during our annual family cookout, my own father humiliated me in front of everyone, joking that I was old enough to start paying rent or get out, all while the rest of them laughed. What they didn't know was that I had already closed on my own house and was just waiting for the right moment to make my exit. The look of sheer panic that washed over their faces when they finally grasped that their personal ATM was closing for good was, I have to admit, utterly priceless. Before I get into the details of this whole emotional saga, I'd love it if you drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and if you've ever had to fight for your own independence against your family's expectations. Please hit that like button and subscribe. Growing up in a quiet middle-class suburb of Denver, my childhood felt pretty standard until I hit 16. That's the year my parents, after 2 decades of marriage, decided to call it quits. My mother, Karen, packed up and moved to Arizona to live near her sister, while my father, Robert, stayed behind in our family home with me. For a while, it was just the two of us, trying to find our footing in this new reality. Dad was a project manager for a logistics company, and his income was more than enough for us to live comfortably. I buried myself in my schoolwork, my sights set on college and crafting a future for myself. But everything was upended just a year after the divorce when Dad met Brenda at a work conference. She was a good 15 years his junior, worked in marketing, and had a taste for the finer things in life. They had a whirlwind romance, and within 6 months they were married. Just like that, I had a stepmother who seemed far more invested in gut renovating our home than in forming any kind of bond with me. The household dynamic shifted from stable to chaotic almost overnight when her 2 daughters from a previous marriage, Chloe and Madison, came to live with us. Chloe was 21 and Madison was 19. They filled our once peaceful house with a constant barrage of noise, drama, and demands. As the eldest, I'd always felt a certain weight of responsibility, but with the arrival of Brenda and her daughters, that weight became crushingly heavy. My dad seemed completely mesmerized by his new wife, readily agreeing to lavish vacations, leases on luxury cars, and a complete overhaul of our home's decor. All the while, I was working my way through high school, eventually earning a scholarship to the University of Colorado Boulder. College was a haven. It was tough, but it was my own. I majored in finance, balancing my studies with part-time jobs at the university library and a coffee shop on weekends. I spent my first 2 years in the dorms, then moved into an off-campus apartment with friends. Those 4 years were the first time I felt truly autonomous, making my own money, my own decisions, and my own life. I graduated with honors and, thanks to my jobs and scholarship, very little student debt, a fact that filled me with immense pride. After graduation, I landed an analyst position at Rocky Mountain Capital, a boutique investment firm in downtown Denver. The starting pay wasn't astronomical, but it offered incredible opportunities for growth. I rented a small apartment with a college friend and poured myself into building my career. At 23, I was financially independent and buzzing with excitement for what lay ahead. Then, just 3 years into my career, disaster struck. My father called me one night, his voice strained and thin, a sound I'd never heard from him before. The logistics company he worked for had been acquired, and his position was eliminated. He was struggling to find new work. The mortgage payments were piling up, and Brenda had amassed a mountain of credit card debt. They were on the brink of foreclosure, of losing the house I grew up in. He asked, his voice thick with shame, if I could just move back home for a few months, just temporarily, to help them cover expenses while he got back on his feet. What was supposed to be a 3-month stopgap measure became 5 long, grueling years. I gave up my apartment and moved back into my childhood bedroom. In the beginning, my contribution was limited to groceries and a share of the utilities. But soon, my responsibilities expanded. I found myself covering the mortgage payment each month, then the car payments for all 3 of their vehicles, the insurance, and even bankrolling Chloe and Madison's endless cycle of failed college courses and extravagant shopping trips. My father's initial gratitude quickly faded, and my financial support transformed from a lifeline into an expectation. Brenda never once acknowledged the sacrifice I was making. She treated me less like family and more like a live-in wallet, despite the fact that I was the one keeping a roof over her head. Her daughters saw me as an endless source of cash, constantly hitting me up for money for clothes, concert tickets, and spontaneous weekend getaways. What hurt the most was how my own successes were consistently brushed aside. When I earned my first major promotion, Brenda immediately changed the subject to Chloe, landing a non-speaking part in a local play. When I pulled all-nighters to close a big deal, my dedication wasn't seen as professional ambition, but as a lack of commitment to the family. Slowly, insidiously, my family cultivated a deep-seated entitlement to my income while simultaneously devaluing the hard work that produced it. As the years crawled by, I watched my personal savings evaporate. As my resentment grew into a towering inferno, my father, who had once been my greatest champion, now seemed to see me as nothing more than a steady paycheck. Our relationship withered, replaced by awkward silences and conversations that revolved solely around bills and household repairs. We never talked about my future anymore. We never discussed my goals or dreams. A tiny, stubborn part of me clung to the hope that they would eventually see the reality of my sacrifice, that the loving family I remembered could be restored. That hope was a trap, keeping me stuck in a draining cycle of giving and receiving nothing in return, not even basic respect. But a new realization was beginning to dawn on me deep down. Nothing would ever change unless I was the one to change it. The only question was if I could find the strength to do it. While my life at home was crumbling, my career was soaring. About 3 years ago, my boss, Martin, took me under his wing. He'd noticed my knack for analysis and my relentless work ethic. He called me into his office one afternoon and laid out a massive opportunity, a special project team tasked with identifying potential acquisition targets for the firm. It would demand significant overtime and weekend work, but it was a direct line to upper management and a fast track for advancement. I seized the opportunity, not just for the career boost, but because it gave me a concrete excuse to spend as little time as possible in that house. The project was highly confidential, so I told my family I was taking on extra hours to help a struggling department, which was technically true. They grumbled about my increased absence, especially when it interfered with their requests, but they didn't question it. For the first time in years, I was in an environment where my contributions were valued and my intellect was respected. 6 months later, our team hit a grand slam. We successfully identified 3 undervalued companies, and the firm moved to acquire 2 of them. The deals turned out to be wildly profitable, exceeding all initial forecasts. The executive board took notice, and Martin made sure my name was front and center in all the reports and company-wide communications about the project's success. As a direct result, I was promoted to senior financial analyst. It came with a hefty salary increase and a new bonus structure that was tied to performance. The role meant more responsibility and even longer hours, but I welcomed the challenge. My family, of course, only saw the bigger number on my paycheck, not the sweat and sacrifice that earned it. The day I received my first substantially larger bonus, Brenda immediately suggested we use the money to finally remodel the kitchen. That was the moment the last shred of hope I had for them died. I decided right then that things had to change. Instead of announcing my financial good fortune, I quietly opened a new savings account at a completely different bank. I had a portion of my new salary automatically deposited into it every 2 weeks. I did the math, figuring out the exact amount needed to maintain my existing contributions to the household, and funneled every single extra dollar into my secret fund. I also started an aggressive investment portfolio, applying the very strategies I was using for my clients at work. 6 months ago, all that diligence paid off. The executive team awarded our acquisition project team with a massive performance bonus, a percentage of the value we had generated. My share was $70,000, the largest single sum of money I had ever seen. I didn't tell a soul, except for my best friend, Sarah, who had been my rock and had been urging me to break free for years. Between my savings and that bonus, I finally had more than enough for a down payment on a house. I got in touch with Linda Chen, a realtor Sarah had used and raved about, and embarked on my clandestine house hunting mission. Linda was a godsend. She understood my delicate situation immediately and worked around my schedule, booking viewings during my lunch breaks or late in the evenings to ensure my privacy. The whole process was both thrilling and terrifying. I lived in constant fear that my family would discover my plan before I was ready. I had all the mortgage documents and bank correspondence sent to my office. I took calls from lenders in my car during my commute. I used Sarah as my personal reference to avoid any chance of my family being contacted. My credit score was pristine, a result of years of meticulous financial management, and my debt-to-income ratio was excellent since I had managed to pay off my student loans even while shouldering my family's burdens. After 2 months of searching, I found it, a charming 3-bedroom bungalow in a quiet tree-lined neighborhood just a 20-minute drive from downtown. It needed a few cosmetic updates, but it had good bones and was well within my budget. The backyard was small but private, with a beautiful, mature maple tree shading a stone patio. I could instantly picture myself out there, sipping my morning coffee in peace, without Brenda asking when I was going to the grocery store or Madison asking to borrow my car. The closing was nerve-wracking. I booked the final signing for a weekday afternoon, telling my office I had a dentist appointment. As I sat there, signing the mountain of paperwork that officially made me a homeowner, I felt a dizzying mix of pure terror and absolute elation. I now owned a home that my family knew nothing about, and I had absolutely no idea how they would react when they found out. For the next 2 weeks, I secretly prepared to move. I booked a moving company, ordered essential furniture online to be delivered the day after I moved in, and began stealthily packing my personal belongings whenever the house was empty. I kept Sarah in the loop on everything, and she helped me strategize the timing of my departure. We decided the day after the annual family barbecue would be perfect. The family would be tired and distracted, less likely to notice me making my final preparations. As the moving date loomed, I was a pendulum of emotions, swinging between giddy excitement for my new life and a heavy guilt about the financial fallout my family would face. I knew they had become completely dependent on me, but I also knew that this dependency was a poison for all of us. My father had to finally take ownership of his finances. Brenda had to learn to live within a budget, and her daughters needed to stand on their own 2 feet instead of using me as a crutch. The night before the barbecue, I lay awake in my old bed, staring at the familiar water stains on the ceiling, listening to the house creak and groan around me. Despite everything, this had been my home for most of my life. Leaving felt like closing a massive chapter. But as I finally drifted to sleep, I felt a deep certainty that the next chapter would be one written entirely by me, not one dictated by obligation and exploitation. The annual summer barbecue was a family institution. Even after the divorce, my father had kept the tradition alive, partly to project an image of normalcy, partly to show off for the extended family. This year was no different, except for one small detail. It would be the last one I ever attended as a resident of that house. The backyard had been prepped for the event. Dad had spent the morning meticulously cleaning the oversized grill he only ever used for this party. Brenda had laid out rented tables with red and white checkered cloths, matching paper plates and floral centerpieces that I knew cost more than our weekly food budget. Chloe and Madison had been given the simple task of hanging string lights and setting up a drink station, a task they performed with maximum complaint before vanishing into their rooms to get ready. I, as usual, had been assigned the role of head chef and caterer. I'd been up since 6 in the morning, marinating chicken, prepping vegetables for a massive salad, and baking 3 different kinds of dessert. No one seemed to notice or care that I had also paid for every single ingredient on top of doing all the labor. By the time guests were scheduled to arrive at 2 p.m., I was already exhausted and hadn't even had a chance to shower. I rushed upstairs, threw on a simple sundress, and quickly applied some concealer to hide the dark circles under my eyes. When I came back down, the party was already in swing. Uncle Frank and Aunt Patty were the first to arrive, bringing their famous potato salad. My father's colleagues from his new, lower-paying job followed, along with their families, and then a group of Brenda's friends. By 3:30, the backyard was teeming with about 30 people. The air was thick with the smell of charcoal and sunscreen. I moved through the crowd with trays of appetizers I'd made, refilled drinks, and helped my dad manage the grill, all while dodging passive-aggressive questions about why a successful woman my age was still living at home. Around 4 p.m., I managed to sneak away to my room to answer an urgent work email from Martin about a presentation for Monday morning. When I returned 15 minutes later, I overheard Brenda complaining to one of her friends, Vanessa. I wouldn't have given it a second thought, except I heard my name. "Amelia makes good money now," Brenda was saying with a sigh, "but we hardly see a cent of it. Robert lets her live here practically for free, and meanwhile, my poor girls have to scrimp and save." The sheer audacity of her statement was so breathtaking that I nearly dropped the salad bowl I was carrying. In reality, I was paying the entire mortgage, most of the utility bills, and was regularly giving Chloe and Madison cash on top of paying for their sporadic attempts at community college. Brenda hadn't held a job since she married my father. I set the bowl down and was about to retreat when my dad clinked a glass and called everyone to eat. As people filled their plates and found seats, I ended up sitting between Uncle Frank and one of my dad's co-workers. I ate in silence, trying to push Brenda's words out of my head and reminding myself that by this time tomorrow, I would be free. After the main course, my father stood up to give his traditional barbecue speech. He thanked everyone for coming, cracked a few tired jokes, and then launched into the annual praising of his children, a ritual that always made my skin crawl. "Chloe is just flourishing in her acting class," he announced, beaming. "She just landed a featured part in the community theater's production of Grease." Everyone clapped as Chloe preened. "And Madison has decided to pursue her passion and has been accepted to cosmetology school." Another round of applause. I waited, holding my breath for him to mention my promotion, the project that had made the company millions, anything. But he just moved on to thanking Brenda for her hard work in organizing the party. I felt completely invisible. Uncle Frank, always more perceptive than my dad, leaned over and quietly asked how my job was going. I had just started telling him about my promotion when Brenda cut in from across the table. "Oh, Amelia's always working," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "We barely see her. I think she's married to her job." My face burned with humiliation. The truth was, I hadn't had time to date in years because I was too busy working to support her and her daughters. Uncle Frank tried to salvage the conversation. "Well, that's wonderful about the promotion, Amelia. You were always the smart one." Before I could even thank him, my father chimed in with a laugh. "Yeah, smart enough to know a good deal when she sees one. Free rent, home-cooked meals. She's got it made." A few people chuckled along with him. I forced a smile, my chest tightening. If only they knew how utterly backward his words were. Brenda saw her opening and pounced. "Robert, honey, maybe it's time Amelia started contributing a bit more. After all, with that big promotion." I couldn't believe it. They were actually suggesting I wasn't paying enough. My father paused, a thoughtful look on his face, then nodded. "You know, you're right, Bren." He turned his full attention to me, the entire table now silent and watching. "Amelia, you're 35 now. Most people your age have their own place. If you're going to stay here, I think it's time we had a formal arrangement. It's only fair." I felt trapped, a specimen under a microscope. "What did you have in mind?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "Well, Brenda and I were thinking $1,200 a month would be fair, for your room and board." He said it with an air of magnanimity, completely ignoring the fact that I was already paying their $2,500 mortgage, plus hundreds more in bills and groceries. The table buzzed with agreement. People started sharing stories about their own adult children paying rent. I sat there, frozen, the sheer nerve of it all sucking the air from my lungs. 5 years of propping them up, and they saw me as a freeloader. Dad raised his beer in a mock toast. "So, what do you say, Amelia? Pay up or get out?" Everyone laughed again, as if he'd just told the funniest joke in the world instead of delivering a public ultimatum to the person single-handedly keeping them afloat. Tears threatened, but I refused to give them the satisfaction. I stood up, plastered a tight smile on my face, and said, "I'll think about it." Then I turned and walked back into the house, my legs shaking. In my room, I shut the door and finally let the tears come. Not tears of sadness, but of pure, white-hot rage. And strangely, relief. They had just made my decision so much easier. Any last flicker of guilt I felt about leaving them to their own devices had been extinguished by their stunning, breathtaking ingratitude. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. After I escaped the barbecue, I stayed in my room for over an hour, just breathing and letting the rage subside. The party continued outside, the sound of laughter and music drifting through my open window, a surreal soundtrack to the moment my life had irrevocably changed. For them, it was just a throwaway joke. For me, it was the final, undeniable proof that I had to leave. Once I was calm, I opened my laptop and started organizing. For years, I had kept a meticulous digital record of every single cent I had spent on that household. Part of me did it for tax purposes, but another wiser part of me always knew a day like this might come. I compiled it all into a single, undeniable spreadsheet. Mortgage payments totaling $150,000 over 5 years. Utility bills that added up to nearly $18,000. Groceries that topped $45,000. Car insurance for 3 vehicles. property taxes, emergency home repairs. The grand total was well over $250,000. And that didn't even include the thousands in direct cash I had given to Chloe and Madison for their tuition and whims. All of this came from a salary that had started at $60,000 and only recently jumped to $95,000 with my promotion. I printed the spreadsheet and then began drafting a letter. I wanted it to be clear and firm, but not cruel. After several drafts, I settled on a version that calmly explained my decision, laid out the financial facts without emotion, and wished them well. I made 3 copies, one for my father, one for Brenda, and one to leave on the refrigerator door where no one could miss it. Next, I triple-checked the moving arrangements for the morning. The movers were confirmed for 9 a.m. By then, my family would be scattered. Dad had a Saturday golf game with potential clients. Brenda had a hair appointment, and Chloe and Madison rarely surfaced before noon on weekends. It was the perfect window to execute my escape without a confrontation. I texted Sarah to confirm she'd meet me at the new house to help with the movers. She replied instantly with a string of encouraging emojis and an offer to bring coffee and donuts. Her unwavering support had been my sanity through this whole ordeal. With the logistics handled, I did a final sweep of my room. Most of my clothes and personal effects were already packed into suitcases I had hidden in the back of my closet. My important documents were in a fireproof box. Books, photos, and other keepsakes were already packed in boxes in my car's trunk, moved there bit by bit over the past week. As I sorted through the last of my things, I found a box of old photos, my high school graduation, with Dad beaming beside me, a family camping trip from before the divorce, even a few holiday photos from recent years where, to an outsider, we looked like a perfectly happy family. I packed them. They were part of my story, for better or worse. Around 9 p.m., the party finally wound down. I heard Brenda complaining about the mountain of trash, and my father volunteering me to clean it all up. When he called my name, I went downstairs and silently started clearing tables and bagging garbage. He watched me for a moment. "You okay? You disappeared for a while there." "I'm fine," I replied, my voice flat. "Just a long week at work." He seemed to accept this. "Well, think about what we discussed. Brenda and we really think it's for the best. I'll give you my decision tomorrow," I said, the double meaning hanging in the air, completely lost on him. For the next hour, I cleaned up the entire mess by myself, while my father watched TV and Brenda took a long bath. Chloe and Madison had left to go out with friends as soon as the guests departed. It was a perfectly symbolic end to my time there. By 11 p.m., the house was finally quiet. I took one last, long shower in the bathroom I'd used my whole life. Then, in my pajamas, I walked through the darkened house, taking mental snapshots. The living room where I'd watched cartoons as a kid. The kitchen where my mom used to cook. The back deck where Dad taught me the constellations. Despite the bitterness of the last 5 years, this house held a lifetime of memories. I paused outside my father's bedroom door, listening to his familiar, heavy snore. A part of me wanted to wake him up, to have one last, honest talk. But I knew it would devolve into arguments and guilt trips. Some things were better left unsaid until distance could cool the emotions. Back in my room, I set my alarm for 5 a.m. I slipped into bed for the last time, fully expecting to be tormented by anxiety. Instead, a profound calm settled over me. I was doing the right thing. For my future, for my sanity, and even for them, though they wouldn't see it that way. I wasn't running away. I was running toward the life I had earned and sacrificed. Tomorrow would be hard, but it would also be the first day of my freedom. And with that thought, I fell into the deepest, most peaceful sleep I'd had in years. My alarm went off at 5 a.m., and I was instantly awake. The sky outside was just beginning to blush with the light of a new day. Perfect moving weather. The house was dead silent as I tiptoed down the hall. Everyone else would be asleep for hours. Once I was dressed, I began the final phase of my operation. I rolled my packed suitcases out of the closet. I stripped the bed and neatly folded the linens at the foot of the bare mattress. The room looked sterile, a hotel room that had been vacated. I made several quiet trips, loading my suitcases and the last of my boxes into my car. The cool morning air felt electric on my skin. Back inside, I went to the kitchen. I laid my letters and the detailed financial spreadsheet on the counter where they couldn't be missed. I poured a coffee into my travel mug, then paused. On pure instinct, I pulled out the pancake mix. I couldn't help myself. I whipped up a batch of batter and left it in a bowl in the fridge, with a note that just said, breakfast. It was my final, ingrained act of caretaking. At 6:30 a.m., I heard the floorboards creak upstairs. My father. I grabbed my purse and coffee, took one last look around, and slipped out the front door just as I heard his bedroom door open. In my car, I allowed myself one single tear to trace a path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of overwhelming relief. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, heading toward my future without a single glance in the rearview mirror. My first stop was the office. I had arranged a brief meeting with Martin, who often came in on weekends. He was surprised by the request, but agreed immediately. "Amelia, what brings you in on a Saturday?" he asked, smiling as I entered his office. "Big day, Martin," I said, sinking into a chair. "I'm moving into my new house today." His eyebrows shot up. "New house? You kept that quiet. Congratulations." "I had to for personal reasons," I explained. "And that's why I wanted to talk to you. My family doesn't know yet, and I suspect there might be some fallout." He took off his glasses, his expression turning serious. I found myself telling him everything. The 5 years of support, the constant demands, the barbecue, my secret plan. He listened patiently, his look shifting from surprise to a grim understanding. "Amelia, I had no idea," he said when I finished. "You've always been the consummate professional here. I never would have guessed. I try to keep my personal life separate." He nodded. "That's a testament to your character, but you have to know what you've described. That's financial abuse." The words hit me hard. I'd never put that label on it. But hearing him say it, I knew it was true. "I just thought I was helping," I said quietly. "There's a line between helping and being exploited," he said gently. "You've made the right decision, not just for your finances, but for your well-being." He even offered to be a buffer if my family tried to cause problems at work. His validation was like a shield, reinforcing my resolve. I left his office feeling stronger than ever and drove to my new house. Sarah was already there, leaning against her car with a huge grin. "Independence Day," she yelled, pulling me into a hug. "How are you feeling?" "Nervous, excited, terrified, free," I laughed. "All of it." The moving truck arrived at 9 a.m. sharp. For the next few hours, Sarah and I were a whirlwind of activity, directing the movers and placing my carefully chosen furniture, a bed, a sofa, a dining set, a desk. The house was sparse, but it was mine. By 1 p.m., the movers were gone, and Sarah and I were sitting on my new sofa, eating sandwiches. The quiet in the house was a peaceful, welcoming silence, not the tense, resentful silence of my old home. "A toast," Sarah said, raising her water bottle. "To new beginnings and paying your own mortgage." We laughed and clinked our bottles. It was then that I checked my phone for the first time. 10 missed calls from my father, 5 from Brenda, and a flood of texts, escalating from confusion to outright rage. They'd found the empty room and the letter. "Should I call them back?" I asked Sarah. She shook her head. "Number. Let them marinate in it. You gave them 5 years of your life. They can give you 24 hours of peace." The rest of the day was a happy blur of unpacking, making my bed with new sheets and arranging my kitchen. As evening fell, Sarah left, and I was alone in my house for the first time. I walked from room to room, touching the walls, looking out the windows. I made a simple pasta dinner and ate it at my new table, raising a glass of wine to myself. This was it. This was what I had worked so hard for. As I was washing my single plate, my phone rang again. It was my father. I took a deep breath and answered. "Amelia, what in the world is going on?" he demanded, his voice a mix of anger and panic. "Where are you?" "I'm at my new house, Dad," I said calmly, like my letter explained. "What letter?" "I saw some crazy spreadsheet, but no explanation for why you just vanished." "Did you actually read it?" I asked. "I glanced at it. It doesn't make any sense." "This has to stop, Amelia. Brenda is a wreck. Dad, I wrote very clearly that I've moved out and will no longer be supporting the household financially. That spreadsheet shows exactly what I've contributed for the past 5 years. There was a pause. "That's ridiculous. You helped with a few bills, but we gave you a place to live." The familiar dismissal made my blood run cold, but I kept my voice even. "I paid the mortgage, Dad, every single month. I paid the utilities, the groceries, the property taxes. I paid for Chloe's and Madison's cars and tuition." "That's not true," he sputtered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Check your own bank records," I said. "It's all there." Another long silence. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller. "We need to talk about this, in person." "Where are you?" "I'm not sharing my address right now," I said firmly. "I need some space." "Space? We're your family." "Yes. And a family is supposed to support each other, not financially drain one person while mocking them at a party." In the background, I could hear Brenda shouting, her voice rising in hysterics as she realized I was on the phone. She must have snatched it from him. "Amelia, this is completely unacceptable," she shrieked. "You have obligations to this family." I had to bite back a bitter laugh. "Obligations? Like funding your lifestyle for 5 years? Check the records, Brenda. I left them for you." "Well, what about the mortgage payment due next week?" she demanded, inadvertently admitting she knew exactly who paid it. "You and Dad will have to figure that out," I said coolly. "I suggest you create a budget based on your actual income." She gasped. "You can't just leave us high and dry." "I gave you 5 years," I said. "That's hardly high and dry. It's time to adjust your spending." I heard Chloe in the background asking if I'd taken the car that was in my name. "I have to go," I told Brenda. "We can talk more when everyone is calmed down." I ended the call as she was still protesting. My phone immediately started ringing again, but I silenced it. Tonight was mine. As I got ready for bed in my new room, with moonlight streaming through the windows, I felt a deep, profound sense of rightness. I had enabled their behavior for far too long. This wasn't just about saving myself. It was about forcing them to grow up. For the first time in 5 years, I fell asleep without a single worry about anyone's needs but my own. It felt like coming home. Monday morning was a revelation. I woke up naturally, bathed in sunlight, feeling a sense of calm I hadn't known in years. My phone was a minefield of missed calls and frantic texts, most of them about the impending mortgage payment. I felt a fleeting pang of guilt, but it was quickly overshadowed by resolve. This was the cycle I had to break. I sent a single text to my father. I am safe and at work. We can talk later this week. Then I silenced my phone and headed to the office. The morning was wonderfully normal, a welcome distraction. Around 12:30, as I was about to leave for lunch, my desk phone rang. It was Marissa from reception. Amelia, your family is here, in the lobby. They're, making a bit of a scene. My blood ran cold. I knew a confrontation was coming, but I never imagined they would ambush me at my workplace. I called Martin, who immediately offered to come down with me. As the elevator doors opened to the lobby, I saw them. My father pacing, Brenda perched on a leather chair looking thunderous, and Chloe and Madison looking deeply uncomfortable. They were a chaotic island in the serene, corporate ocean of our lobby. Amelia, Dad strode toward me. You can't just ignore us. We have bills due. Martin stepped smoothly between us, extending a hand to my father. Mr. Davis, I'm Martin Shaw, Amelia's supervisor. This is a place of business. Perhaps we could find a more private setting. The professional authority in his voice seemed to deflate my father. Martin guided us into a small, glass-walled conference room. As soon as the door was closed, Brenda erupted. Do you have any idea the mess you've made? The mortgage, the utilities, Madison's tuition for her summer classes? I looked at each of them. My father, angry and utterly bewildered. Brenda, radiating pure entitlement. Chloe, resentful. Madison, just confused. I have supported this family for 5 years, I began, my voice low but steady. I have paid for everything while being treated like a freeloader. That's not true, Dad protested. I left you a spreadsheet, Dad. Over $250,000 in 5 years. Did you look at it? He looked away. The numbers can't be right. They are exact, I said. I paid the $2,500 mortgage every month, the $600 in utilities, the $200 a week in groceries. I paid for your daughter's cars and their classes. The color was draining from my father's face as the reality sank in. Even if that's true, Brenda cut in, you can't just cut us off without any warning. You can do what every other family does, live within your means, I replied. Dad makes a good salary. It's not my problem if your lifestyle exceeds it. Chloe stepped forward. So you're just going to let them lose the house? Some daughter you are. My patience snapped. Chloe, you are 26 years old and have been attending community college for 6 years. Instead of criticizing me, maybe it's time you got a job and contributed. Her jaw dropped. We're your family, my father said, his voice softer now, pleading. Families help each other. Yes, they do, I agreed. But help is a two-way street. I put my entire life on hold for you. I couldn't buy a home. I couldn't build savings. I couldn't even have a social life because I was working to fund your choices. And in return, you humiliated me and told me to pay rent. He flinched. That was just a joke, Amelia. It wasn't funny, Dad. It showed me exactly how you see me, as a resource to be tapped, not a person to be respected. We can work something out, Brenda tried, seeing him waver. You could just help with the mortgage for a little while. I shook my head. Number. I have my own mortgage now. The Bank of Amelia is permanently closed. You bought a house? Madison asked, her voice full of surprise. Yes, a lovely bungalow I can actually afford on my own salary. How? Chloe demanded. Because I'm smart with money, I said simply. And because 6 months ago, I got a $70,000 bonus that I saved instead of spending on a new kitchen. My father looked like I'd punched him. You never told us about a bonus. If I had, would you have let me keep it? I asked. His silence was the only answer I needed. I looked at my watch. I have to get back to work. My financial support has ended. You all need to figure it out. But what about right now? My father asked, looking lost and suddenly old. The bills? The desperation in his voice softened me, just slightly. Dad, you make $90,000 a year. That's more than enough if you budget. You'll have to cut back on luxuries, and Chloe and Madison will have to get jobs, but you won't be on the street. Will we ever see you again? He asked, his voice cracking. That question hit me. Of course, Dad. But our relationship has to change. I'm your daughter, not your financial plan. When you're ready to have a relationship based on respect, I'll be here. As they left the conference room, defeated, Lauren hung back. I'm sorry, she whispered. I really didn't know you were paying for everything. Her quiet apology meant more than I could say. Back at my desk, I found a sandwich and a coffee with a note from Martin. Thought you might miss lunch. Hang in there. His simple act of kindness, a stark contrast to my family's behavior, brought tears to my eyes. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from my father. We need to talk more. But I did look at the spreadsheet. I had no idea. I'm sorry. Those 2 words were a start. A week later, after a tense but civil phone call, they came to my house for dinner. My father, looking humbled, gave me a real, heartfelt apology. He admitted he'd failed me, that he'd let things get out of control because it was easier than facing his own financial reality. Brenda, looking pained, admitted she'd been selfish. They told me their plan. They were putting the house on the market to downsize. Madison had gotten a job at a salon, and even Chloe had an interview lined up. It was a start. The road ahead would be long and bumpy, but for the first time it felt like we were all moving in the right direction. That night, alone in my quiet, peaceful home, I felt a sense of rightness settle deep in my bones. I hadn't abandoned my family. I had finally given them the gift of responsibility. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with family members who were taking you for granted? It's one of the toughest things to do, but it's so often the catalyst for real growth, for them and for you. I would love to read about your own experiences in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories about finding your strength. Thank you for listening. Remember that sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that lead to the most profound peace.